It's supposed to be 70 degrees today. It's freezing here. Speaking of global warming, where is we need some global warming? It's freezing.
The most criticized scene in the movie An Inconvenient Truth was showing that the combination of sea level rise and storm surge would flood the 9/11 memorial site. And people said, what a terrible exaggeration.
Hurricane Sandy slammed into New York City last night, flooding the World Trade Center site.
Storms get stronger and more destructive. Watch the water splash off the city. This is global warming.
I feel so scared. Sorry.
Despair can be paralyzing, but this to me is the most exciting new development. We're seeing a tremendous amount of positive change. The basis is there, but it's still not enough.
It's crunch time at the climate change conference in Paris.
Still some really tough negotiations going on.
What would it take to shift to renewables? I'm talking about breaking the impasse.
Virtually every nation in the entire world agreed to get to zero greenhouse emissions. It is unprecedented.
It's time to put America first. That includes a promise to cancel billions in climate change spending. Our plan will end the EPA.
The next generation would be justified in looking back at us and asking, what were you thinking? Couldn't you hear what the scientists were saying? Couldn't you hear what Mother Nature was screaming at you?
This movement is in the tradition of every great movement that has advanced humankind.
We're not going to recognize it. We don't want to discuss it.
It is right to save humanity. It is wrong to pollute this earth. It is right to give hope to the future generation.
Don't let anybody tell you that we're going to get on rocket ships and live on Mars. This is our home. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Patty Cosgrove, before I say anything else, this is the last event of this Web Summit. Let's give it up for Patty and his entire team who've made this event such a great event. Congratulations to you. Thank you for having me here. It's an honor to close out this fantastic event. I come to you today at a time when many people are worried about the state of our world, worried as well about what's going on in my country. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But we had an election last Tuesday that brought a little hope for change in the months and years to come. But I'm not going to talk about politics. I want to talk to you about the climate crisis. I want to talk to you about what we all can do together to get our world headed back in the right direction. We know we can do it. We're seeing the development of a lot of momentum. You know, many are worried that our economic system is not fit for purpose. I think there obviously have to be some serious reforms to capitalism so that we start integrating the environment and sustainability values into what we measure and what we invest in, what we decide to do. Many people, perhaps especially in my country, are worried that our democracy has been hacked, and in many countries, elites have captured the policy-making process. We've seen the rise of inequality of incomes and net worths in almost every country in the world. We have seen the stagnation of middle-income wages for decades, really. And it's in part because of the hacking of the political system. It's in part because the globalization process has not been mediated by sufficient investments in job training and skills acquisition and much higher quality education and opportunities for all. And of course, we have seen the onrushing climate crisis. I'm not going to make my whole speech about the climate crisis, but you'd be surprised if I didn't talk to you a good bit about it. There are really only three questions left where the climate crisis is concerned. Number one is, do we really have to change? We still rely on carbon-based energy for 80% of all the energy used in this world, and it's lifted living standards and reduced poverty and helped to create the modern conveniences. And naturally, people ask, do we really have to change? Well, spoiler alert, the answer is yes, but I'm going to give you a little more detail on why we really have to change. But when you hear these examples, don't get too depressed, because the answers to the second and third questions are actually very positive and very optimistic. The second question after do we have to change is, can we change? And it's equally important, because if we have to change and we don't have the ability to change, then that's a recipe for anxiety and depression and despair, and people just are tempted to say party on. But the answer to that second question, can we change, is a resounding yes, and I'm going to give you a few examples of that, some of them on vivid display right here in Portugal. And then the third and final question is, will we change? And that's the most important question of all. And I'll tell you in advance that my purpose here is not to entertain you. It's not to try to just give you some facts that you may not have run across previously. My purpose here is to recruit you to be a part of the solution to the climate crisis and the ecological crisis on this planet. We can solve it, we have to solve it, and with your help, we will solve it. Now, why, first of all, thank you. When I get to the answer to that third and final question, will we solve it, I'm going to close out my talk with a discussion of how entrepreneurs and startups and growth stage companies and web experts and technologists actually are playing one of the key roles of all. It's very exciting what's going on, and I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful, but we need to match all the new tools we have and all the exciting opportunities with enough political will to really get the job done. Everything depends on it. But first of all, that first question, do we really have to change? I won't belabor this too much, but most of you know the facts. There's a collision underway right now between human civilization as we have come to organize it and the ecological system of this planet. And there are many manifestations of it. The destruction of the vitality of our oceans, the weight of the plastic in the oceans will soon exceed the weight of the fish in the oceans. We're seeing dead zones spreading. What's happening to a lot of the beautiful forest areas and the wetlands and the mangroves. We're seeing the conversion of land in destructive ways to uses that hurt the critical role land plays and the plants and animals play in sustaining the web of life. But the single most important part of this collision between civilization and nature is the climate crisis. And the reason it's the most important is that the most vulnerable part of the Earth's ecological system is the atmosphere. The sky is a very thin shell surrounding the planet. Most of you know that, but when you walk outside on a beautiful day like today, the sky can appear as if it goes on forever. But you see from the pictures brought back by the astronauts from space, it's a very thin line. If you could drive a car at highway speed straight up in the air, you'd get to the top of the breathable sky in about 5 to 10 minutes. And every single day, we're putting 110 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into that thin shell of atmosphere, and it's trapping heat. The accumulated amount is so large that it now traps every day as much extra heat energy as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours. And that is disrupting the natural cycles. Most of it goes into the ocean, and that disrupts the water cycle. That's why we've got all these big downpours now. That's why we've got the bigger floods and the mudslides. That's why we have what they call rain bombs. In my country, over the last 2 months, we had Hurricane Harvey that dropped 1.5 meters of rain on Houston, Texas, a once in 25,000 year event. And they had 2 once in 500 year events and another once in 1,000 year event during the 2 years leading up to Hurricane Harvey. And then we had Hurricane Irma that devastated the Caribbean islands, and Hurricane Maria that flattened Puerto Rico, and they're still flattened, and they need help, and Key West, Florida, and other parts of my country. And then we had the historic fires in California, by far the worst fires in the history of California, because the same extra heat that disrupts the water cycle and causes these big downpours and floods all over the world. By the way, the same week Houston was hit, 10 times as many people died in South Asia. 1/3 of Bangladesh was underwater. India got 50 centimeters of rain over and above what the monsoon typically brings. In Nigeria, 100,000 homes destroyed and disrupted. It's a global phenomenon. But the same extra heat energy that causes the disruption of the water cycle also pulls the moisture out of the soil, and it dries things out. The droughts take hold quicker and go deeper and last longer. And that's been happening here in Portugal and in Spain and in other places, in Greece and Italy and all over the world. We're seeing in Africa right now droughts that have caused the United Nations to warn us this month that we are on the verge of the worst humanitarian crisis since 1945, with 30 million people near starvation. Political factors involved, civil wars involved, but the base of it is the drought. That's what happened in Syria. Long before the civil war started in Syria, they had the worst drought ever measured in the history of the Eastern Mediterranean, 2006, 2010. It destroyed 60% of the farms in Syria, killed 80% of the livestock, drove 1.5 million climate refugees into the cities. And long before the civil war, the ministers in Syria were saying in the leaked conversations that are on the web, this is going to cause all hell to break loose. We can't handle this. And then the civil war started. Again, other causes. But the refugees from the Middle East and North Africa began to shake the political stability in the European Union. And you've seen this wave of populist authoritarianism that has many causes, some of the economic factors I mentioned a moment ago, but some of these countries really can't take a sudden huge wave of refugees. Even Brexit, what a dumb mistake that was for the United Kingdom to make, in my opinion. But one of the 2 most powerful advertisements was the billboard put up by the Leave campaign that showed an endless line of refugees from the Middle East and North Africa at the borders of Europe, and they say, we don't want them here. Keep them out. Let's leave the European Union. I could go on in describing the political disruption that is in prospect if we don't get a handle on this climate crisis. The same extra heat is melting the ice and raising sea level. We're seeing both Greenland and Antarctica melt at an accelerated rate. In Miami, Florida, I walked in the streets sloshing through water on a sunny day, no rainfall in sight, hadn't been any, but it was high tide. And there are many cities around the world, a lot of them in South Asia, a lot of them in North America, some in Europe. Tropical disease is moving northward. these storms, like the hurricanes and cyclones and typhoons, get stronger. Anyway, all of those and other consequences tell us the answer to that first question, do we have to change, is yes, we have to change. What are you thinking? Of course we have to change. We cannot condemn the next generation to lives of degradation and despair. So, let me lift you back up. That's a depressing list of consequences, and there are more that I've left out. But the second question is, can we change? And there the answer is an incredibly positive and resounding yes. Look at what's happened in the world of technology. Just look at energy, for example. We have seen the same kinds of cost reduction curves, cost down curves that astonished the world in previous decades with computer chips and flat screen TVs and mobile phones. That's happening with solar energy. That's happening with wind energy. It's happening with battery storage of energy. It's happening with electric vehicles. It's happening with efficiency improvements that are too numerous to mention. In fact, here's what I believe, and the evidence, I believe, bears this out. Our world is now in the early stages of a sustainability revolution that has the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, but the speed of the digital revolution. And it's empowered by the digital tools, including the Internet of Things and machine learning and progressively better forms of artificial intelligence. And a lot of these new tools and technologies are being developed by men and women right here in this auditorium today. Thank you for what you're doing. You are already making a huge difference. What we are seeing in this sustainability revolution is the emergence of a new ability given to CEOs and executive teams in enterprises all around the world to manipulate and deal with atoms and molecules with the same precision and dexterity that has been demonstrated by the internet and computer network companies in dealing with digits of information. We are seeing unnecessary waste eliminated. We're seeing new business models. We're seeing the use of data to figure out what needs to be done, focus on that, get rid of the unnecessary encumbrances and waste, and just get the job done. This is beginning to reduce emissions. And where the generation of electricity is concerned, solar photovoltaic electricity has been coming down so fast in cost that in many areas of the world, it is now significantly cheaper than any kind of electricity that can be produced from fossil fuels, burning coal or gas or diesel or oil. Last month in the Middle East, they had 13 bids for new electricity generation. Winning bid 1.7 cents per kilowatt hour, and if you don't happen to speak kilowatt hour, that's less than 1/3 the cost of electricity from burning coal. Of those 13 bids, 12 of the 13 beat the previous all-time low price record for electricity from solar, a record that had just been set 6 months earlier. So technology is helping us to displace fossil fuels and generate electricity from clean, renewable sources. We can match that up with the new levels of efficiency in business, industry, homes, every part of our civilization. And we can match it up with the transportation system by shifting over to electric vehicles as quickly as we possibly can. Electric cars, electric trucks, electric buses, electric scooters. Now, I want to put on my investor hat for a moment and tell you that there are an increasing number of investors who come to gatherings like this one and smaller ones. I don't think there is one bigger than this, but to meet with young entrepreneurs and business teams that are using their knowledge and skills and technology to advance this process forward. I'm the co-founder and chairman of Generation Investment Management. We've invested in an electric bus called Proterra. Amazing, 1,100 miles on a single charge. We invested in an electric scooter out of Taiwan called Gore. Unbelievable. Changed the batteries out in 6 seconds. We've invested in a company called Mkopa in East Africa that is spreading solar energy all over that region. They have competitors that are also doing a great job. And you know, by the way, in the developing countries of the world, they do not have elaborate landline electricity grids, so a lot of them don't have electricity now. In India, there are as many people with no electricity at all as the entire population of the United States of America. And they're not going to get it with these grids taking electricity from coal-burning plants, but they're going to get it from solar. They're going to get it from rooftop solar and village solar and utility scale solar and from wind, and it's getting cheaper all the time. India has just announced they're closing a whole lot of coal mines, shutting down the new coal-fired generating plants and shifting massively to solar. And it creates jobs. In my country, solar jobs are now growing 17 times faster than all other jobs in the United States of America. It's the #1 fastest growing occupation. The #2 fastest growing occupation is wind turbine technician. The global economy, what do we need? Well, we need reforms to capitalism, as I said, but we also need to address what the economists call a weakness in secular demand. We need a global project to put tens of millions of people to work. Well, you know what? We've got a global project to solve the climate crisis, to address the emissions that are destroying our future at present and put people to work on solar and wind and batteries and electric cars and sustainable agriculture and sustainable forestry and efficiency improvements. So I want you to know that there is a growing market for the kinds of initiatives that many of you have labored long and hard to bring to fruition. There is a growing interest on the part of investors who care not just about making a quick buck in a short period of time, but investing in businesses that are helping to create a bright and prosperous and sustainable future. Every one of these social revolutions, like the climate movement, like the sustainability movement, has been led ultimately by young people. And I look out at this audience and I know who you are. Most of you are extremely young. Most of you are determined to be a part of building a bright future. Making good money, yes, but in the process, helping to make the world a better place. That's what we all should be about. So, can we solve this climate crisis? Yes. We have the tools that we need. They are available. Now, there's opposition in the political systems of this world. The fossil fuel companies have built up over the last century a lot of monetary wealth and political power and a network of connections, and they're pulling out all the stops to try to paralyze this historic movement of the sustainability revolution. But you know, the people still ultimately have the most powerful voice. And those of you who are building exciting new businesses can have much more influence than practically anybody else. Generation puts out an annual sustainability trends report. We published the first one just a couple of weeks ago. I'd encourage you to go look at that on our website, generationim.com. There is now this global movement that business is leading. Some politicians are doing okay, and I could pick out several that are, but in too much of the world, the politicians are trying to slow things down. And of course, I said I wasn't going to talk about politics in my country, so I'll probably keep to that if I can help myself. But enough is enough. By the way, I'll just mention one election race in my country last Tuesday. Kind of a minor. A lot of the attention went to the governor's races in two of our big states, New Jersey and Virginia. But I'm going to tell you about one race way down the ballot for the state legislature in Virginia. They call it the House of Delegates. There was a 73-year-old Republican legislator, had been in there for 20 some odd years, and he prided himself on being the author of legislation banning the use of restrooms by transgender people. A transgender woman just defeated him in the election on Tuesday. And I thought to myself, you go girl. And she was very kind and thoughtful in talking about him and his family afterwards. I was very impressed. But here's the good news on the political front. A year ago, December, in Paris, the Paris Agreement was a genuinely historic breakthrough. Every single country in the entire world, 195 countries, signed the Paris Agreement. Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm coming back to that. Two didn't sign, Nicaragua and Syria. Both of them have just signed. President Trump did announce last June that the United States, if it follows his advice, is going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Let me tell you a couple things that wasn't covered as well in the news media. Number one, under the terms of that agreement, the first date upon which the United States could legally withdraw is the day after the next presidential election in 2020. So the United States is still in the Paris Agreement. And by the way, if there is a new president, excuse me for just a moment. If there is a new president can simply give 30 days notice and the U.S. is back in the agreement. But more important than any of that, the day after President Trump made that announcement, every other country in the world said, we're still in the Paris Agreement. And in the United States, California, the state of California, the state of New York, and a bunch of other states, and hundreds of cities, and thousands of business leaders, they all said, we're still in the Paris Agreement, and launched a new hashtag we got this. So you need to make a distinction. The figures now show that the United States is going to meet and exceed its commitments under the Paris Agreement. So you need to make a distinction between President Donald J. Trump and the United States of America. The United States of America is going to meet its commitments, and we are going to do our part in spite of Donald J. Trump. But here's the thing. That third and final question, will we change? Doesn't have an answer yet. I believe I know the answer. I believe the answer is yes. But the real answer is really and truly going to come in significant part from you. I mentioned the Paris Agreement was an historic breakthrough. It was. Amazing. The proverbial and metaphorical train has left the station. Governments, investors, businesses, industries, individuals, they're all planning now to meet that long-term goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century or as soon thereafter as possible. But if you add up all of the commitments made by all of the countries that signed that Paris Agreement, they still don't add up to enough to solve the crisis. Still good news, because we've got a firm foundation. But the agreement also has a mandatory provision that every 5 years, every country that signed that agreement has to review its commitments, has to look closer at how that how those cost down curves have continued to make renewable energy and efficiency much cheaper and much more accessible. And then beef up their commitments. And that process is going to start next year. So my point is, you, especially those of you who are building technology companies that can bring higher levels of efficiency and rationality to reduce emissions, to make businesses more efficient in every possible way, you can have a bigger impact on whether or not we really do change, whether the answer to that question, will we change, is yes, than practically any other group in the entire world. You know, I say your generation, I know there are people of all different ages here, but allow me just to say the generation that's the median here in this group. You want to be a part of productive enterprises that make good money, but also move us in the right direction. Now is your time. And remember that every great social movement in the history of this world that has advanced the cause of humanity has been led by young people. I mentioned some of them in that clip: the abolition of slavery, the women's suffrage movement, the anti-apartheid movement, the anti-nuclear arms race movement, the civil rights movement in my country, more recently the gay rights movement. If somebody had told me even 5 years ago that in my country in the year 2017 gay marriage would be fully legal in all 50 states and accepted, honored, and celebrated by 2/3 of the American people, I would have said, I sure hope so, but what are you smoking? Because that doesn't seem very likely to me. But what happened is what has happened in all of these great movements. When the central question is boiled down to a binary choice between what's right and what's wrong, then the outcome is foreordained because of who we are. That is the moment we're at right now. That is the tipping point we stand on the threshold of right now with the climate movement. So I'm asking you here at the end of my talk, just as I did at the beginning of my talk, I'm trying to recruit you. I wish that I could find the words and the manner of articulating them that would go straight from my heart to your heart. Everything is at stake. Trust me, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, you're going to look back at this year, 2017, and you're going to say, boy, it was a whole lot more serious than I realized it was, and the opportunities were much greater than I realized they were. That's the moment we're in. We need your help. We need your passionate involvement. And I'll close with this. There are people I know who are vulnerable to sinking into despair in spite of the fact that we have all the tools we need to solve this crisis, because they think to themselves, maybe we don't have the will to change. Well, let me just remind you that the will to change is itself a renewable resource. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with you at the WebSummit. Good luck to you.